Hey everyone, my name is Lori Forrester, and I'm back with you to do part 2 of pharmaceuticals. Last time we talked about how our pharmaceuticals made it to our wastewater treatment plant via our homes and our toilets. Today we're going to talk more about how pharmaceuticals get into our surface water and groundwater and how it moves from the land to those areas. So last time we talked all about our water and sewer customers through our toilets. Today we're going to start off by talking about if you are not on our system, if you have a septic tank and you have a well. And so I'm going to go ahead and move around to the front, and we're going to be talking about our rural homes. So if you live in a rural area, your home is on a septic tank. And so when you go to flush the toilet, you're putting water down into a septic tank. Now, just as we had talked about with homes in the cities, pharmaceuticals pass through your body. Sometimes they're taken up, sometimes they're not. Other cases, you decide that you're going to get rid of your pharmaceuticals by flushing them down the toilet. These same things can apply in a rural home. So it goes down underneath your house into your septic tank. Once everything settles out of your septic tank, the water that sits on top goes out into our septic field in the front yard. So anything that's not used up as far as pharmaceuticals goes out into our system here. Now, this doesn't just stay here. What happens is every 3 to 5 years, most everybody needs to remove what is left in the bottom of that tank. Certain things are going to be broke down, other things are not. So you have to have somebody with a truck come in and pump out all those solids that's left over into your septic tank. You've seen septic haulers around the county in their trucks. They put a hose down into a septic tank, they pump it out. Where do they take this stuff? They always have to take this to a wastewater treatment plant. So we're going to move this stuff over to our wastewater treatment. So we're going to move that over to here. It's added to the wastewater stream at the water treatment facility. So that's what's happening there. What about what happens to this water here? If we have pharmaceuticals left over that have, in this process, has gotten into there, it could potentially get into our groundwater. So that's what we're dealing with our septic tanks. Now, this has moved. We're moved over to, we talked about how that moves to our wastewater treatment plant. So let's just say that you say, okay, I heard you. So we're not going to flush our pharmaceuticals down the drain that goes to the wastewater treatment plant. So we're going to put that in our trash can. Okay, let's see how that may affect it. So we're picking up trash, and you've dumped all your antidepressant medication down. You put it in a plastic bag, you've sent it off in the trash truck. Where do you think that goes? Well, clearly it goes to our landfill. So our landfill is up here next to our farm. So we're going to move around over here to our landfill. And when this stuff gets to our landfill, along with the landfill, there's chemicals that come from multiple locations. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those chemicals later on, but we have the pharmaceuticals and the chemicals that go to the landfill. When it rains, it goes down into the liner of the landfill. That's why it's so important to have these liners. We don't want what's being put into the landfill to go into our groundwater. And we just so happen to have our row house right next to the landfill. So if they don't have water, they're not on our water system, they get their water from a well, which is pulling from the groundwater. So let's just say that there is the liner fails on the landfill. We're going to see what happens here. It's raining, there may be a hole in the liner. Now this is seeping down into our groundwater. That could be a problem. Then what happens is now our groundwater now is contaminated with our chemicals and our pharmaceuticals. Now what happens to our leachie, which is what's left over from the landfill? Well, so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take this and they'll reapply it over the landfill. So it keeps going down through. Other times what happens is they take this leachie and they apply it. They send it to our wastewater treatment plant. So once again, we have our possibly contaminated pharmaceuticals, our chemicals, which is being put directly, taken back to our wastewater treatment facility, which we've already talked about does not have the technology to remove pharmaceuticals. So let's talk about our farms. So our farms often need fertilizer. So what wastewater treatment plants do is what they have left over, just like the house, they have a septic tank. There's solids that are left behind. And so those can't stay. In a wastewater treatment plant, it's exactly the same way. We call them biosolids. So our biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant are put into a truck and they're hauled to South Georgia somewhere where they kill the E. coli, the bacteria that's in there, they mix it with peanut hulls, and then that is applied to our fields. So this is now fertilizer. So we're actively fertilizing the fields with our biosolids. It acts just as a manure from cows, the same thing in that case. So that's applied to our fields. They do a really good job of making sure that this material is safe to do this with. We also take some of our biosolids, which is produced from the plant, they put it in bags and they sell it from Home Depot as well. So it's not just used as a fertilizer for farms, it's also used for fertilizer for homes as well. Now let's talk a little bit about animals on the farm. So just like humans, animals often take antibiotics to keep them safe and healthy. And so their bodies don't necessarily use up all of the antibiotics before it's released out in their feces. So if they're just going to the restroom on the ground and it rains, we have runoff into the river. This is going to happen no matter what we do, especially if they have access to getting directly in the river, which oftentimes they do. The best way to manage this is to, number one, let's fence these animals out of the river. That's the first thing we want to do. And then we want to manage the waste that's on the ground. So if we're cleaning out barns or areas that's close to the house or things like that, you want to take their manure and you want to clean that up and you want to put it into your compost pile, compost bin, which could then be applied to your fields. Lots of farmers manage this multiple ways. So we're going to be taking those manure piles and we're going to be putting those into our compost pile. And so now when it rains, there's less likely for what is on the ground, less likely for it to get into the water, which could or could not have pharmaceuticals in it. A big case is you obviously have to keep your barn clean. So you want to keep those stalls clean. So shoveling that out and putting into a compost bin. A lot of times people even come by and buy your compost for their gardens around the area. So that is our situation with our farms. And then what happens, we've been talking about this multiple locations. What happens is we could end up with pests. Now pests are something that is not always a problem, but is always a potential problem. And so with our pests, we're going to find those on the farm. Anytime you have food hanging around of any source, you could have rats and mice that decide they want to live there. So pest control is another one of those things where you kind of want to leave it up to our professionals. Our professionals know how much poison they use. They normally set either they set live traps or they set traps and they come and they remove the carcasses of the rats and the mice. And so if you're managing this on your own, the rats or the mice may come by, eat the poison, and then maybe die in our rivers, which is not necessarily a good thing. Their carcasses could have that poison in it that you put out there. More adversely, a hawk could come by and eat that rat carcass, and then now the hawk is infected or affected by that poison that's out there. So that is another really important thing that we need to think about when we're talking about pest control. If it's around your home, lots of times around the landfills, they have rats and mice that they have to control because there's that major food source. And so managing your pests is another way that are pharmaceuticals that could have been in animals such as the cows, or even that end up in the landfill where the rodents are at, or even around your homes in your garbage. This is one of the things that ways that it could get into our water source. So speaking of our water source, we've talked about our water plant and other in depth in our previous video, but we get our water out of the Etowah River. So just like in the wastewater treatment plant, our water treatment plant does a great job of keeping all the bacteria out of the water, but it's not equipped with technology to remove trace pharmaceuticals. So if pharmaceuticals are getting into our source water of the Etowah River, then it could potentially be getting into our drinking water. The good news is a fact that we've heard is that in order for these trace amounts of pharmaceuticals to harm somebody, you would have to drink the amount of an Olympic-sized swimming pool every single day. So right now, not so much an issue. In the future, it could be an issue, and if things are happening within our community as they continue, that could become a problem. And that's why we're taking serious looks at what's going on with pharmaceuticals in our water. Now, our best way of managing pharmaceuticals and keeping it completely out of any kind of water source is for you to take your pharmaceuticals to the drop boxes that are provided at our police stations around Cherokee County. So we want to make sure that those get to those locations and they get incinerated properly so that they have no chance of getting into our landfill, which we all know eventually goes back to our wastewater plant, or it could potentially get into our groundwater. So the safest way for us to deal with those pharmaceuticals is to utilize our drop boxes. Now, one thing that we'll often hear, and it's not a truthful thing, is pharmacies will not take your prescriptions back, the unused prescriptions. If you take it there, they will say, sorry, we don't take that. And that is a myth that's all the way I've heard for years. So know that you can't take it back to the pharmacy. They're not going to take it back. But you can always drop it off at these drop boxes all around the county. And this is not just Cherokee County. This is all counties in the metro Atlanta area. Thank you very much. I hope you've learned a lot about pharmaceuticals and you've learned what to properly do with them and how they could possibly get in the water and how that impacts us. Have a great day.